Good morning, my dear students. Welcome back to Social Science online teaching classes from Vishwamanava Residential High School. I am Mahboobi, your social science teacher. My dear students, in the previous class, we have already discussed some of the important concepts in this lesson. One is meaning of public finance and its importance. Second one is meaning of budget and its types. Third one is meaning of public expenditure and the reasons for increasing public expenditure. These points we have already learned in the lesson public finance and budget. Now let us continue part of this lesson. We are going to discuss one is public revenue or public income, second one is public debt, and the third one is deficit financing. These points today we are going to learn in this video. Okay, my dear students, let's start. Public revenue. Public revenue, it is nothing but public income. What is the meaning of public revenue? Public revenue means is the income mobilized by the government only for the purpose of financing the governmental activities is called as a public revenue. If the income mobilized by the government for the purpose of financing activities, it is called as a public revenue. Public revenue may be realized from the taxation or non-taxation sources. These such revenue from the government. Then, along with the classifications of the functions, the Constitution has also specialized the sources of the revenue of the central and the state governments. We shall now briefly understand the sources of revenue of the central government. The central government collects its income from various sources. All of you know that. These sources can be broadly classified under two types. One is revenue receipt, second one is capital receipt. What is mean by revenue receipt? Revenue receipt means the revenue, the income generated by the government through taxes and non-taxes. These such sources, it is called as a revenue receipt. Taxes and non-taxes sources. The revenue receipt, it is a real income of the government. The revenue receipt, it is a revenue income generated by the government through taxes and non-taxes. It is called as a revenue receipt. What are the major important sources of the revenue for the government? One is tax revenue. Second one is non-tax revenue. What is mean by tax? Tax, it is a compulsory payment. What is mean by tax revenue? The tax revenue means it is a compulsory payment by the citizens to the government without accepting any direct benefit in return. It is called as a tax revenue. The central government imposes several types of the taxes. All of you know that. The taxes are the major sources of the income for the government. The government imposes higher rate of the taxes on the high income group rate and the lower rate of the taxes on a low income group. The higher rate of the taxes and the lower rate of the taxes. The higher rate of the taxes imposed on only for the luxuries, goods and services used by the rich people, and the lower rate of the taxes of the goods and services used by the common people. It is called as a progressive taxation. This higher rate of the tax and the lower rate of the tax, it is called as a progressive taxation. These taxes, the tax revenue of the central government has further divided into two types. One is direct tax, second one is indirect tax. What is mean by direct tax and what is mean by indirect tax? Let us discuss one by one. One is direct tax. When the tax is paid by an individual, it is called as a direct tax. This direct tax, it is not transferable to the others. These the direct tax that are generally taxed on only for the income and wealth earned by the individuals or direct tax. What are the examples of the direct tax? One is personal income tax, second one is corporate tax, third one is wealth tax, and the fourth one is stamp duties. That is the direct tax. It is paid by and only for the individual, that is called as a direct tax. It is not transferable to the others. Then second one is indirect tax. If the burden of tax imposed by the government is transferable to the others, it is called as a indirect tax. Understand? All of you know that the indirect tax are imposed on only for the goods and services. For example, the government imposes tax on the manufacture of the goods and services at the time of producing such only for goods and services. That is indirect tax. The government is transferable to the others, that is called as indirect tax. The manufacturer transfer this burden to the order trader. This trader transfer this burden to the consumer. This means the government imposes tax on the producer. The tax is ultimately paid by the consumer. What are the major important forms or what are the examples of the indirect tax? Central excise duty, value added tax, import export tax, and service taxes. These are the forms or examples of the indirect tax. However, with the effect from the direct and indirect taxes, the 1st July 2017 in that year, a single goods and service tax has been introduced, that is GST. GST has been introduced in the year 1st July 2017. These are the types of taxes or tax revenue. One is direct tax, second one is indirect tax. Then the second point, that is non-tax revenue. The another important types of the revenue receipts, that is non-tax revenue. The government gets revenue from the other sources, that is called as non-tax revenue. The government gets income from the other sources. It is called as non-tax revenue. What are the major important types of non-tax revenue? One is the non-tax revenue profit earned by the Reserve Bank of India. Second one is the profit generated by the Indian Railways. Third one is the income generated by the departments of the post office and telecommunications. Then fourth one is revenue, income generated by the public sector and industries. And the fifth one is income generated by the coins. And the last one is the various types of fees and penalties. These are the types of non-tax revenue. I already told the government gets revenue from the other sources, that is called as a non-tax revenue. These are the types of revenue receipts. One is tax revenue, the second one is non-tax revenue. Then another important types of the central government collects, the heads of the one is revenue receipts and another one is a capital receipt. What is mean by capital receipt? Capital receipt means the receipt which either created a causes a reduction in the assets of the government, that is called as a capital receipt. The receipts which either created a causes a reduction in the assets of the government, it is called as capital receipt or capital revenue or capital income. For example, the borrowings lead to an increasing in the liability for the governments. Similarly, these receipts from sale of share of public enterprises of the government, hence they are called as a capital receipt. Then let's move on. Another important concept in this lesson, that is public debt. What is mean by public debt? Public debt, it is nothing but public loans. The government borrows money from internal and external sources, that is called as a public debt. The loans obtained by the citizens of the country, banks, financial institutions and industries, it is called internal loan. And the external loan, the loan obtained from the foreign governments, foreign financial institutions and the international financing institution. These are the external loans. The government borrows money from internal and external sources, that is called as a public debt or public loans. Understand? Then last concept in this lesson, that is deficit financing. The government first estimates its income. When doing so, it is usually plans for more expenditure than the income. In order to fill any gaps between income and expenditure, the government raises loans from the internal and external sources. What is the particular meaning of the deficit financing? If the expenditure is more than the revenue, more than the income, it is called as a deficit financing. Understand? If the expenditure is more than the income, is called as deficit financing. The government resort to various measures to cover up this deficit in expenditure over income. Usually, we can see borrowing from Central Bank of India. This, the Central Bank of India, it is also includes printing and additional notes if required. This deficit financing is defined as financing the budgetary deficit through the loans from the Reserve Bank of India. If the expenditure is more than the income, it is called as a deficit financing. What are the major types of this deficit financing? The deficit financing has broadly classified into 4 types. One is physical deficit, second one is revenue deficit, third one is primary deficit, and the fourth one is a budget deficit. Let us discuss one by one. First one is a physical deficit. The excess of the government expenditure over its revenue receipts and the non-debt capital receipt is called as a physical deficit. If the government expenditure over its revenue receipts and the non-debt capital receipt, it is called as physical deficit. How it is calculated? Physical deficit is equal to revenue receipts plus non-debt capital receipts minus total expenditure. In the physical deficit, we can see the total expenditure. That is physical deficit. Then second one is revenue deficit. The revenue deficit is excess of the total revenue expenditure of the government over its total revenue receipt. Revenue deficit is the excess of the total revenue of the expenditure of the government. How it is calculated? Revenue deficit is equal to revenue receipt minus revenue expenditure. Then third one is primary deficit. Primary deficit is defined as physical deficit of the current year minus interest payment in the previous borrowings. In this primary deficit, we can see current year minus deficit interest payment. How it is been calculated? Primary deficit is equal to physical deficit minus interest payment. The last one is a budget deficit. Budget deficit, it is the overall gap between revenue and expenditure, income and expenditure during a thought out year. How it is been calculated? Budget deficit is equal to total revenue minus total expenditure. These are the types of deficit financing. One is physical deficit, second one is revenue deficit, third one is primary deficit, fourth one is budget deficit. My dear students, in this lesson, in this video, we have learned public revenue or public income, types of the public revenue, then second point, public debt, and third point, public deficit financing, meaning and types of deficit financing. In the lesson public expenditure, in the lesson public finance and budget. My dear students, in the public finance and budget, in this lesson we have already learned the meaning of the public finance and its importance, types of budget and public expenditure. Now in today's we have learned meaning of the public revenue, types of the public revenue, then public debt and deficit financing. My dear students, public finance and budget, public finance and budget chapter is completed. Okay, my dear students, thank you.